Yes, the time has finally come. I've left Unity and switched to Godot at last. And the first game will be a first-person shooter. Sort of. But why am I now switching? Well, I wanted to keep the promise I made before.
I'm a man of my word.
Besides, I was still reminded the betrayal from Unity. It only reminded me the betrayal from someone who I once thought was a friend.
Damn you! You traitors!
Now, the first thing I've learned were Godot nodes. And what appealed to me were the little icon emojis, which made Godot user-friendly. But what was really interesting was, unlike Unity, Godot's nodes followed a tree structure and were similar to Unreal Engine's blueprint objects. And when I first started programming in GDScript, I noticed it was awfully familiar.
He copied my whole fucking flow! Word for word, bar for bar!
Anyways, I would have preferred C#, but there were more tutorials on GDScript instead. But since I've got some experience in C++, maybe I could program just in C++? Or both in GDScript and C++? I don't know. You could comment below what you think is the best mixture of languages I could probably use. Meanwhile, I was creating a player with
the Beats pill.
I was still trying to learn how to program movements in GDScript, and my mind was blown when I only needed 4 lines to make player controllers. And because I needed more practice in GDScript, I made a little program. Whenever the spacebar is pressed, blocks are spawned in random places. But you're here to see a FPS game, so I remade the player, and this time with a character controller as the main node. Added a camera and programmed its controls, and learned about the input maps in Godot and used those instead to control the player. But as I was using Godot, I was confuzzled why my scene was rendering an ugly gray scene. And that was because I was missing an environmental scene. I don't know why that fixed it, but it renders nicely, as if I was sent to heaven with the queen. But next, let's shoot things. And since I've learned how to spawn nodes, I just needed to add lots of force to the projectiles that I created here. But it looked awfully if I were throwing up balls. But before I made any changes, I wanted to add more immersion to a camera view, so I programmed a simple walk effect by just moving the camera up and down. And you know what function moves up and down? That's right, the sine function. See, math doesn't always have to be that boring. Afterwards, I modeled a badass revolver where I found some inspiration of concept images from Google. After that, I set up the revolver to the player, animated a weapon recoil to make it feel like there's some bam to it, and reprogrammed the shooting function to spawn projectiles on the weapon spawn point. And to add a last touch of magic, I went to free sounds, found a nice sound effect that sounded great, and added an audio stream player node that plays audio in the player program. And then I programmed it to play the sound when shooting.
Well, duh.
But I needed some enemies for a FPS game, so I made one with
the Beats pill.
And colored it red because we all know them reds are all bad. Also, I don't know if this is wrong here, I used a rigid body node as its main node instead of a character controller because I wanted enemies to be able to interact with other rigid bodies and programming it to follow the player since I couldn't be asked to do more stuff. And the first try was a fail because I forgot to lock its rigid body rotations. And when I learned how to delete nodes, I created a health bar and programmed it to lose 10 health points when hit by a bullet. However, something was off with the weapon recoil, and that was, it wasn't recoiling in sync when the player is shooting. So instead of animating the recoil, I programmed it. And how this works is, a variable of a weapon's rest position is defined in a direction vector opposite of the bullet being shot. And every time I shoot, the direction's reaction force times a multiplier is added. Meanwhile, the weapon is constantly moving towards the rest position. Still don't get it? Well,
Please consider the following.
this is a player. When it jumps, it sends him up away the ground. Then a downward force will pull him back to the ground, that would be gravity. Except these forces will be high and the player can jump without having to touch the ground. Well, thank you for joining me on Consider the Following. And back to Blender, I created an outfit for the enemy with a mohawk with sunglasses, which either make him look like a bad guy or just a douchebag. And expanded the environment with walls, just cause for now it's just something to start with. It's better than just the empty arena. But finally, this is the final quote-unquote game that is done here. I obviously didn't spend a ton of time on this game. I was just mostly learning Godot, but I guess the weapon recoil is what does most of the heavy lifting of making the game fun. Anyways, from now on, Godot will be the main engine I'll be using, and Unreal Engine, I still have some plans for some games, but the games that were made in Unity will be moved to Godot, and probably one of them will go to Unreal Engine, but they have yet to be completed, so they might as well go to Godot. So yeah, I finally made the switch, finally left Unity, so smash that subscribe button if y'all want more Godot content here. Also, thanks for 200 subs.